This is, I think, certainly the most important position that we could be talking about for a wide variety of reasons. Obviously, quarterback position, just in general, being the most important position on the field. But then you start to look a little bit closer at KU's quarterback situation, and you recognize that this season could hinge on this particular room for Kansas. So we have to start with Jalon Daniels, I think, right? He's going to be the presumed starter coming into 2025. Jalon Daniels has had a bit of a roller coaster of a career, dealt with injuries. You go back to 2022, he's a Heisman contender, injures his shoulder then after a 5-0 start for Kansas. And then you look at the more injuries he dealt with, the back injury that really took him out for most of the season in 2023. Then in 2024, we talked about it a lot, felt like he dealt with maybe some rust issues from coming back from injury, got off to a slow start. Ended up finishing pretty strong, though, in 2024. Yeah. Now he comes into 2025 as essentially the lone returner of the skill position players for Kansas. We've got a brand new wide receiver room, basically. You've got Daniel Highshaw behind you, but other than that, you're going to have new running backs. On the offensive line, you've got a couple of returners, but he is certainly the focal point of the returning production of this KU offense. And I want to start here, Kevin. How much pressure do you think that puts on Jalon Daniels to not only return maybe to what we've seen from him in the past? You know, think about the preseason All-Conference Player of the Year honors, the Heisman, early Heisman. I mean, how much pressure is there on him to return to that? And on top of that, is there a lot of pressure on him to, do you think, be that right out the gate to start the season?
Yeah, I think it's a multi-pronged answer in that I think there is some pressure for Jalon to be really good and really good out of the gate, because I think it's one of those things where you have a hard time seeing Kansas meet or live up to expectations. And we'll talk about, sort of the win total and maybe what those expectations are a little bit later in the show. It's hard seeing Kansas meet or exceed those without a really big year from Jalon Daniels. Like that's putting it down on a plate. I think the offense is going to be something you're going to rely a lot on. I think we're really high on Daniel Highshaw right now if he's able to stay healthy. And but at the same time, Devin Neal was a terrific player. Is a guy that we've said, hey, throw up a statue at the new booth for the guy. All-time rushing leader in KU history. He's no longer there. You have a new receiving room. I think the offensive line is going to be pretty good. It may not be right out of the box. It may take them a game or two to kind of find their footing, but I do think that's a group that has some upside. And so that kind of pivots everything around to Jalon Daniels. And to your point, who he was the first 5 games of the season was not Jalon Daniels. And I think it was maybe after the UNLV game that you and I kind of sat down, had a breakdown that we definitely caught some heat for from KU fans who were really angry with his play at that point. But the sorts of throws he was missing, the ways that he was missing them, they weren't Jalon Daniels. And I think that's really when it kind of nailed home, like, okay, this is rust. He's still trying to find himself. Because people were asking us, if you remember in the chats, like, hey, is he still hurt? Is this still an injury thing? Does he have the velocity? All of these things. And you'd see him rip off a throw and you'd say, okay, the velocity's still there. But the pick against Illinois for Quentin Skinner, sort of later in the game, was a seam throw that Jalon didn't see or let go of until it was too late. The pick against UNLV that he threw to Catalon was a seam throw that he threw too late. And if you look over the course of Jalon's career, that's a throw that he's made really effectively. Like, he's somebody that throws it with timing, great ball placement, understands how hard he has to throw that. And so throwing picks in back-to-back games off of that, I think, was sort of the indicator for me that it was like, okay, he's not quite there. Game 6 was, I know people split it up half and half, but I actually thought Game 6 was the game where we saw Jalon become Jalon again, and that was at Arizona State. And you look at some of the plays he made in that game, you look at the fact that he led sort of the game-winning drive at the end. Obviously, Arizona State came back and had the actual game-winning drive, but I think before that 6th game, in in that sixth game was kind of when you saw Jalon become Jalon again. And I think there were some scheme things there too, Nick, where I think Jeff Grimes, different Grimes who left Kansas. I think Jeff Grimes ran some stuff that was similar to what KU was running before in terms of inside zone and things like that. But it was in the margins that things were different, and they were running things that maybe weren't what Kansas was running before. Obviously, people honed in on the bubble screens being something that they were doing a lot of, and that was something that by the end of the year they weren't really running a lot of. The vertical option route stuff was stuff they were running a lot early in the year, maybe not as much later in the year. Now all of a sudden, and I realize I've been talking for quite a while, but that all of a sudden you get Jim Zabrowski as your offensive coordinator, somebody who knows Jalon as well as anybody, knows what his strengths are, knows what he wants to hear called on 3rd and 8. You bring back a tremendous coach in Lubick, who is terrific with quarterback run game and option and all those things that make KU really tough to prepare for. And so all of that coming together to say, Nick, I do think that there's pressure for him to be really good right out of the box for KU to be what they want to be. The flip side of it is, I think if he's got a good offensive line, if the scheme is being called to his strengths, if Daniel Highshaw is who we think he can be, I think he could be stepping into a situation where he could have a lot of success, where maybe he doesn't feel as much pressure because there aren't as many moving pieces around him from that perspective.
I don't mean to be hyperbolic, but I think the entire success of KU football, the entire trajectory of KU football falls directly on the shoulders of Jalon Daniels. Like, period, full stop. I think he has to be great if KU even wants to be close to reaching their potential ceiling as a team. I talked about it. They've got a brand new wide receiver group. You do have Daniel Highshaw, who I think we're both really excited about, but let's face it, Daniel Highshaw has also dealt with a lot of injuries as well for Kansas. How reliable can he be? The defense, I think there's some exciting pieces, some exciting transfers. You've got a brand new defensive play caller, plus the transfers. Is there going to be a period where those guys need to gel, right? So I think it is incredibly critical that Jalon Daniels is not only at the top of his game, but needs to be at the top of his game pretty much right away. And I hope that the KU football staff learned their lesson a little bit from last year, because you outlined a lot of the rust conversation and whatnot. I think it's pretty clear that they were. And I can't really blame them for being this way, looking back on it, but I think it's pretty obvious that the staff was maybe overly cautious with Jalon Daniels last spring into the offseason, into fall camp, in terms of getting him back up to speed and getting him comfortable, right? I think that's safe to say at this point, based off of his production at the start of the year, and then how it seemed like he started to figure some things out towards the back half of the year. So hopefully they recognize that from last offseason and say, okay, we need to make sure that he is doing more to be right away ready to be successful for KU in that first game.